All right, finally then is question 5, which is undoubtedly one of the most difficult things you're going to be looking at in Leaving Cert level maths. So it looks quite awful, but take it step by step, ask your small questions and solve what you can, and you'll start to see things drop out fairly quickly. So the first thing I would ask myself here is, what's the most awful thing about this? And that is the square roots. So how can I get rid of square roots? Well, I do that by squaring both sides. So I'm going to square both sides here, and what I will get is that the square root here and the square here, those will undo each other because they're opposites, and what I'll be left with is e to the 8 plus e to the 4 e cubed minus 1 all over. And then I'm going to have e to the 8 minus 1 e squared plus e plus 1 is equal to e to the, now in this scenario, using my knowledge of indices, I know that when I have a power raised to a power, I'm going to multiply them, so e to the 2k. And what will happen with the square root and the square is that they undo each other, so they cancel, and we're left with e to the k plus 1 by e plus 1. Now, what we need to start doing is asking those questions that we have to go through when we're looking at algebra. So I ask, is there a common factor for this set here? And there is. E to the 4 is common to both, so I'm going to factorize out e to the 4, and what I'm left with then is e to the 4 plus 1, and then I've e cubed minus 1. And then on the bottom, is there anything in common? No, so I'm going to leave that as e to the 8 minus 1 e squared plus e plus 1. So I'm just changing one small thing at a time, and that'll allow me to keep track of what I've changed. Now, I'm only going to change the left-hand side. I'm going to keep the right-hand side the same because it's got that k involved. I want to see, what does the format look like on the left hand side? What will I get out if I can format it in the same way? So let's take a look. So I'm going to keep going. So I've now asked, is there anything in common? I've done that step. I'm going to now check, is there any special rules involved? I can see two things going on here. I can actually see that this is the difference of two cubes. I can also see that down here, e to the 8 minus 1, that's the difference of two squares. Okay, because 1 cubed is 1 and 1 squared is 1. So 1 is a square number and 1 is a cubed number. So that's something that they like to ask quite a bit. So I'm going to keep as much as I can the same and change this part here. So we said that was the difference of two cubes. So I'm going to have e minus 1, e squared plus e plus 1. So make sure you review your key formula and your key rules for algebra. That one comes up quite a bit, the difference of two cubes. Then here we've got e to the 8 minus 1. So e to the 8 is, we said, the difference of two squares. Now, I'll just write it over here. What is the difference of two squares exactly that we're finding? It's going to be e to the 4 squared minus 1 squared. So that's the setup that we have. So I'm going to have e to the 4 minus 1, e to the 4 plus 1. And again, changing nothing else. I'm going to keep that the same. So e squared plus e plus 1. And that's all equal to the right-hand side. I'm not going to change that. I'm going to work towards getting the formatting to be the same. Okay, so bringing that down for us here, that's what we have. All right. So what I can see now here at this stage is that I can simplify this out. So I have e to the 4 plus 1 multiplied in on the top and e to the 4 plus 1 multiplied in on the bottom. So that there then simplifies for me. Now, I also have e squared plus e plus 1, and on the bottom e squared plus e plus 1. That also simplifies down to give me 1. So that gives us 1. So we're now left with something much smaller and neater than what we started out with. I'm left with e to the 4 all over e minus 1. Or rather by e minus 1, and then e to the 4 minus 1. Right, so could we do something with that? Well, yes, actually, I can see that that's the difference of two squares again. So I'm going to be able to break that down further. And what is it that I'm breaking down? So let's just take a look at that here. So I'm going to have e to the 4 minus 1 is equal to e squared squared minus 1 squared. So that's what I'm managing and dealing with here. So constantly thinking about how one is a squared number, one is a cubed number. And that again, then here, not changing at all anything on the right hand side. So breaking this down further, I can get, keeping the top the same. So I'm not changing anything about that. So e to the 4 e minus 1 all over e to the 4 becomes e squared minus 1 e squared plus 1. And then I'm going to be keeping this the same, nothing has changed, just broken down the e to the 4 minus 1. I can go again. There is something else here that I can do. I can actually change and break down this e squared minus 1 further. So I've got e to the 4 on top, so e to the 4 into e minus 1 all over, and then I said I could break that down further, so I've got e squared minus 1, that's the difference of two squares again. So e minus 1, e plus 1, and then I've got e squared plus 1. Keeping the right hand side the same. So I'm going to copy that, keep it exactly the same, changing nothing about it. What I can see here then is that on the top I have multiplied by e minus 1, and on the bottom here I've multiplied by e minus 1. So I'm dividing in and multiplying by e minus 1. So those will undo each other. And what I'm left with then is e to the 4 all over e minus 1, or sorry, e plus 1 it is, left over, e plus 1, e squared plus 1. And that's all equal to this. Now, what I could say at this stage is I could start to involve that right hand side, is I could say multiply both sides by e plus 1. So if I multiply both sides by e plus 1, then that and that, which are currently dividing, would be undone. They would go. And what I would be left with is I would be left with e to the 4 all over e squared plus 1 is equal to e to the 2k all over e to the k plus 1. What I could do at this stage here is break that down to be e squared squared, and then I have e squared plus 1 on the bottom is equal to e to the 2 by k all over e to the k plus 1. And by observation, by looking at that, you can see that what we have is that we have k is 2.